Men walking away has become a crisis for women. Picture this for a moment. Women across China and beyond are waking up to a harsh new reality where the dating and marriage market they once dominated has completely flipped and now leaves them on the outside, looking in with no easy way back. They pushed hard for years, believing their standards and independence would always win out, but the numbers do not lie anymore, and the consequences are hitting home in ways nobody saw coming. Stick with me all the way through because by the time we reach the end, you will understand exactly how this shift happened, step by step, and why it signals a permanent change that affects everyone involved in ways that go far deeper than most people realize right now. The situation unfolding right now in places like China offers a clear window into what happens when expectations in relationships get pushed out of balance for decades and men finally reach their limit and step back entirely. Women in their mid 30s and older, many of them highly educated professionals, are coming forward with stories of deep regret, admitting they turned down solid marriage opportunities earlier in life, thinking they had all the time in the world and that their careers and personal freedom would always be enough. These women describe how they once held out for partners who met very specific high financial and lifestyle criteria, only to discover years later that those same criteria have left them labeled as leftover in their own society and struggling to find anyone willing to commit. It is not about blame in the abstract sense, but about observable patterns where the market has shifted because men are no longer willing to carry the full load that traditional and modern expectations combined have placed on them. The result is a growing population of singles heading toward hundreds of millions where both sides feel the strain, but men are choosing peace over pressure in record numbers. What we are seeing is the natural outcome of years where the costs of marriage and family life kept rising while the benefits for men stayed flat or even decreased in real terms. In China, the average guy faces demands that include providing a full apartment car and sometimes large bride price payments, all while earning around 30,000 yuan a year, which makes the math simply not add up for most. Women in these testimonials talk openly about how they rejected average men in their 20s because those men did not check every box for wealth and status, yet now in their 30s, they are lowering those standards dramatically and still finding the doors closed because the men have already moved on to lives that do not include those burdens. It is a straightforward economic reality mixed with cultural shifts where men are waking up to the fact that entering marriage often means taking on massive debt and risk, especially with divorce rates, where assets can be divided in ways that leave the man starting over from scratch. This is not some abstract theory, it is playing out in matchmaking agencies across the country where the majority of clients are now women desperately seeking matches while men sit out entirely. Men in this environment have started prioritizing their own stability and freedom over the traditional role of provider that society still expects without question. They look at the full picture, including the long term expenses of raising children, which can run into millions per child when you factor in housing, education, and everything else, and they decide the trade off is not worth it anymore. Instead, they focus on simple lives with lower overhead, no constant financial demands, and the ability to travel or pursue hobbies without the weight of supporting an entire household on one income. This choice is not driven by anger, but by clear pattern recognition, where men see that the system as it stands rewards one side disproportionately and leaves the other exposed to too much downside. Women in their stories express surprise at this shift, saying they never imagined the pool of willing partners would shrink so dramatically once they hit their 30s, but the data shows single numbers climbing steadily, and men are not rushing back in to fix it. The broader pattern here extends beyond any one country because similar dynamics show up wherever relationship expectations have tilted heavily toward material demands and one sided responsibilities. Men have always been the ones stepping into the gap between harsh realities and family life, but when that gap becomes a chasm filled with unsustainable costs, many simply stop stepping forward. They learn through direct experience that offering commitment under those conditions often leads to loss of assets, peace, and future options without corresponding rewards. This leads to a quiet but massive exit where men build minimalist lifestyles centered on what actually brings them satisfaction rather than external pressures. The women left on the other side start sharing their frustrations publicly, describing how difficult it has become to meet someone stable and how the independence they once celebrated now feels isolating as biological timelines move forward without pause. You can hear it in the voices of women who once embraced the idea that marriage could wait while they focused on themselves, only to realize later that the market does not pause with them. They talk about phoning family members in tears or joining matchmaking services late in the game and still facing rejection because the men have recalibrated their own priorities towards self preservation. This is the sobering part because it reveals how quickly the balance can tip when one side consistently raises the bar without adjusting their own contributions in return. Men are not disappearing out of spite. They are simply applying logic to what they observe around them and choosing paths that protect their resources and mental space. The old model where men absorbed all of the risk and provided everything while women contributed. Presence alone no longer holds up under modern economic pressures, and men have noticed. As this plays out day after day, more stories emerge of women acknowledging past choices that seemed empowering at the time, but now leave them without the family they assumed would always be available later. They describe lowering their standards repeatedly, yet still encountering men who prefer solitude over the financial and emotional load that marriage has come to represent. It is a direct consequence of years where societal messages encouraged women to aim high and delay commitment while men quietly absorbed the message that their role was expendable unless they met escalating criteria. The result is not chaos for its own sake, but a logical response where men redirect their energy inward toward careers, hobbies, and personal growth that do not come with attached strings or hidden costs. This shift brings them a level of comfort and autonomy they report as genuinely fulfilling once they let go of the old expectations. The stories from these women highlight a turning point where the realization hits that time and options do not wait indefinitely. One woman born in the late 80s describes how she passed on early proposals thinking better ones would come only to find herself now in her mid 30s facing a market where men her age have already settled into single routines or chosen partners from earlier cohorts. Another, with advanced degrees, shares her regret over prioritizing career milestones over building a family unit, realizing too late that the independence she gained came at the expense of partnership stability she now craves. These accounts are raw and unfiltered, showing the internal conflict when past decisions meet present realities without easy reversals. Men on their side explain calmly that they see the pattern clearly and have no interest in becoming the sole financial anchor in a setup where the risks fall mostly on them. This pattern of withdrawal is accelerating because men are applying simple math to their futures and finding the numbers do not favor traditional paths anymore. Housing costs alone can consume years of savings, and when combined with expectations for vehicles, gifts, and ongoing support, the burden becomes one that many decide to avoid entirely. They focus instead on building personal reserves that allow rest, travel, and hobbies without the interference of family debts or disputes that can arise later. Women, in turn, are experiencing the downstream effects where the freedom they pursued leaves them navigating life without the shared support they once took for granted. It is not a punishment, but a consequence of choices that accumulated over time until the scale tipped permanently. Observing this unfold feels like watching a large scale recalibration where both sides learn the limits of previous assumptions. Men are discovering that solitude does not equal loneliness when it brings control over their own resources and schedule. They remove unnecessary complications from their daily lives. and invest in what sustains them long term without external validation. This minimalist approach suits their nature and leads to genuine contentment that they describe as liberating after years of feeling pressured to perform a role that grew increasingly one sided. The women facing this new landscape start voicing their own adjustments, admitting that survival on their terms has proven more challenging than anticipated and that the dating pool has narrowed in ways they did not foresee. The shift carries implications that reach into daily life for everyone involved because when large numbers of men step back from the marriage market, it changes the entire social fabric in measurable ways. Birth rates decline, household formations slow, and the economic ripple effects touch everything from housing demand to consumer spending patterns. Yet, for the men who have made the choice, the outcome is often described as positive, with more energy left for self development and less stress from carrying disproportionate loads. They trust what they see in real outcomes over promises or societal expectations, and that trust keeps them committed to their current path. The women who share their stories now do so with a sense of urgency, hoping to bridge the gap. But the response from men remains consistent. They have found their balance and see no reason to return to the old dynamic. Continuing this way, we see how economic realities in high pressure environments like urban China amplify the choices men are making worldwide. The average income simply cannot support the combined weight of modern living costs and traditional provider roles without leaving the man vulnerable to long term financial strain. When divorce enters the equation, the division of assets often leaves men restarting with less while still facing ongoing responsibilities. This awareness spreads through word of mouth and direct experience, leading more men to opt for independence early rather than risk the downside later. Women who once viewed marriage as an eventual certainty now confront the reality that the partners they seek have already calculated the odds and chosen differently. The testimonials keep coming in with women expressing how they truly believed their personal achievements would make them more desirable, only to learn that those same achievements sometimes raise the bar so high that average men felt disqualified from the start. They reflect on moments where they rejected proposals thinking the next one would be better, and now face the quiet truth that those opportunities do not cycle back around. Men, meanwhile, report a sense of clarity once they accept that their peace is worth protecting above all. They simplify their routines, focus on health and interests that recharge them, and avoid the constant negotiation that relationships under unequal expectations often require. This creates a self reinforcing cycle where men thrive in their chosen lifestyle and women adjust to a market that no longer bends to previous demands. As the numbers of singles climb, the conversations in public and private spaces turn more frequently to these exact dynamics, with both sides acknowledging the change but approaching it from their own perspectives. Women describe the emotional weight of realizing their window for certain life milestones has narrowed, while men emphasize the relief of no longer feeling obligated to fill roles that drain them without fair return. The pattern holds steady because it is rooted in observable facts rather than fleeting trends. Men see the full cost structure and decide the value does not justify the investment. This decision frees them to pursue paths that align with their strengths and brings a level of satisfaction that feels earned through deliberate choice rather than societal pressure. The deeper we look, the more it becomes clear that this is not a temporary dip, but a structural adjustment that will shape family formation for years ahead. Men have internalized the lessons from watching others carry heavy loads, and they apply those lessons by building lives centered on self reliance and minimal external dependencies. Women, in their reflections, often circle back to the idea that earlier compromises might have led to different outcomes, but the market has already adapted and moved forward without them. The result is a sobering reminder that actions and expectations carry long term weight, and once the balance shifts, restoring it requires changes from all involved that not everyone is ready to make. Men who have walked this path describe how focusing on personal peace allows them to enjoy small, daily comforts without the overlay of someone else's unmet needs weighing them down. They trim away what does not serve their core happiness and invest time in pursuits that recharge rather than deplete. This approach feels natural because it aligns with their ability to handle reality directly without the buffer they once provided for others. The women observing this from the outside start to voice their own experiences of navigating life solo and finding it heavier than expected, especially when combined with the biological realities that do not adjust to career timelines. It is a straightforward cause and effect where the push for certain independences met the limit of what the other side was willing to sustain. This brings us to the point where the full picture starts to settle in for anyone paying attention. The men are not angry, they are resolved, and that resolution keeps them steady on their course. They trust their own assessment of costs and benefits over external calls to return, and that trust is what makes the shift feel permanent. Women who reach out now do so with lowered bars and genuine questions, but the response remains measured because the patterns have been observed too clearly to ignore. The situation in China stands as one visible example of a larger trend where relationship dynamics evolve under pressure, and men choose the option that preserves their long term well being above all else. The stories continue to illustrate how this plays out in real time, with women sharing their journeys toward acceptance or continued search, while men quietly build routines that suit them without apology. It is not about winners or losers, but about people adapting to the incentives they face, and those incentives have changed dramatically over time. Men see the full scope of responsibilities and opt for the version that allows breathing room and personal control. This choice accumulates into a collective movement that reshapes expectations on both sides and leaves the landscape looking different from what many assumed it would always be. As more accounts surface, the common thread is the recognition that timing and balance matter more than previously acknowledged. Women who delayed for valid personal reasons now face the reality that the market did not pause with them, and men who once participated fully have found better uses for their energy and resources. The peace men report comes from alignment with their own nature and the freedom to live without carrying disproportionate weight. This creates a new normal where single life for men feels like a positive default rather than a fallback. And for women, it prompts a reevaluation of what they bring to the table in return. The economic side cannot be overstated because it underpins so much of the decision making. When the cost of entry into marriage includes assets that take decades to acquire and the risk of loss remains high, the rational choice for many men is to stay out entirely. They calculate the lifetime impact and conclude that self directed living delivers better returns on their efforts. Women in their 30s and beyond describe the emotional side of watching this unfold, realizing that their earlier confidence in endless options did not account for how quickly the pool can change. It is a clear demonstration of how incentives drive behavior. And once those incentives favor independence on one side, the other side feels the absence immediately. Continuing forward, the pattern holds because men have learned to prioritize what they can control, and that control brings them stability they value highly. They remove layers of obligation that no longer serve them and focus on the basics that sustain long term happiness. This minimalist mindset allows room for growth without the drain of external demands that grew heavier over time. The women who share their side of the story often express a mix of understanding and frustration. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. At how the dynamics evolved, but the men remain consistent in their choice because the math and the lived experience both point the same direction. This is the reality taking shape right now, and it serves as a direct lesson in how accumulated choices lead to outcomes that feel sudden, but we're building for years. Men have stepped back, not to punish, but to protect. And in doing so, they have discovered a level of peace that keeps them committed. The women navigating the new landscape are left to adjust their own approaches, and many are doing so with the clarity that comes from hard earned perspective. The overall effect is a recalibrated social environment where expectations have been reset by the simple act of men choosing differently, and that choice is reshaping what comes next for everyone. The accounts keep revealing layers of how this shift affects daily decisions and long term planning on both sides. Men talk about the relief of no longer measuring their worth by how much they can provide under unequal terms, and instead building lives that reflect their own priorities. They enjoy the freedom to rest when needed, pursue interest without guilt, and maintain resources for their own future security. Women, on the other side, describe the process of coming to terms with a market that no longer responds the way it once did and the internal work required to move forward with new understandings. It is a human story of adaptation where each group responds to the incentives presented and the results compound into larger societal changes. As we move through these examples, the central truth emerges. Clearly, men have found value in their current path, and that value keeps the movement steady. They see the full picture of costs, risks, and rewards and make the call that aligns with their observed reality. This decision frees them from cycles that previously consumed more than they returned and opens space for genuine personal satisfaction. The women reflecting on their experiences add their own insights into how the timeline of life does not always match earlier plans and how that mismatch brings new challenges to navigate. The conversation between these perspectives highlights the importance of balance that was overlooked in the push towards certain ideals, and now the correction is visible everywhere. The economic pressures in high cost environments only accelerate this process because they make the traditional provider role unsustainable for the average man without significant personal sacrifice. When that sacrifice no longer feels matched by mutual contribution, the logical response is withdrawal, and men have embraced that logic fully. They redirect their efforts towards self built stability and report higher levels of contentment as a direct result. Women who encounter this reality later in life often express the surprise of discovering how quickly the landscape changed and the adjustments required on their end to find new footing. This mutual learning process is what defines the current phase, and it continues to unfold with each new story that surfaces. The deeper lesson here is one of clear cause and effect, where the incentives created over time led to predictable responses from those carrying the heavier load. Men have internalized those lessons and applied them consistently, choosing paths that protect their peace and resources. This choice does not come from isolation, but from direct engagement with reality and the patterns it reveals. Women sharing their side bring the emotional weight of hindsight and the practical steps they are taking to adapt. Together, these accounts paint a full picture of a transition that is both sobering and instructive for anyone watching closely. The pattern repeats across different accounts, with men emphasizing the freedom gained from stepping away from unsustainable expectations, and women describing the process of reconciling past decisions with present options. The men find comfort in minimalist living that aligns with their strengths and avoids unnecessary complications. They focus on health interests and self directed goals that deliver steady satisfaction without the overlay of external pressures. The women, in turn, navigate the implications of a market that has responded to those choices, and they do so with the awareness that timelines matter in ways that become clearer over time. This interplay of perspectives shows how individual decisions scale into broader shifts that affect the entire landscape of relationships and family formation. As the stories accumulate, the consistent message is that men have discovered a sustainable way forward and they intend to stay on it. They trust the evidence of their own experiences and the math of long term outcomes over any call to return to previous roles. This trust keeps them grounded and content in their independence. The women who reach this point in life bring their own reflections on how the balance of contributions needs to be more even if partnerships are to work, and many are applying that insight moving forward. The overall dynamic serves as a real time example of how societies adjust when one side reaches its limit and the other side learns to respond accordingly. The economic and cultural factors at play here make the shift feel inevitable once it gains momentum. Men calculate the full scope of responsibilities, including housing, education, and asset risks, and decide the return does not justify the investment under current conditions. They build lives that allow for rest and personal growth instead, and that decision brings them measurable peace. Women facing the adjusted market share their journeys toward acceptance and new strategies, often noting how earlier assumptions about endless time proved incorrect. The result is a clear understanding on all sides of what sustainable relationships require and why the previous imbalance could not hold indefinitely. This brings the narrative to a point where the full weight of the change settles in as a permanent feature rather than a passing phase. Men have committed to their path because it aligns with their nature and delivers the stability they seek. They remove layers of obligation that no longer serve and focus on what sustains them directly. The women, reflecting on their experiences, add depth by showing the human side of adaptation and the insights gained from hindsight. Together, these elements create a sobering but honest picture of how expectations evolve when tested against real world pressures, and how people on both sides find their way through the resulting landscape. The accounts from this environment continue to underscore the importance of recognizing limits before they are reached and the value of adjusting expectations in time. Men who did so early report the benefits of peace and control that keep them steady. They enjoy routines built around their own needs without the constant pull of disproportionate responsibilities. Women who encounter the shift later describe the process of realignment and the clarity it brings about what matters most in long term planning. This mutual adjustment process is what defines the current reality, and it continues to shape outcomes for those involved and those watching from afar. The broader implications touch everything from personal happiness to larger societal trends, because when men step back in mass, the ripple effects touch housing markets, birth rates, and daily social interactions in noticeable ways. Yet, for the men themselves, the outcome is often one of quiet satisfaction as they align their lives with what they can sustain comfortably. They trust their pattern recognition and act on it, consistently choosing self reliance over risk. The women navigating this new normal bring their own perspectives on timing and compromise, and many use those insights to move forward with renewed focus. The entire situation stands as a clear case of incentives driving behavior and the results that follow when those incentives favor one path over another. The stories keep illustrating how this plays out on the ground, with men describing the relief of no longer feeling obligated to meet escalating criteria, and women sharing the internal work of coming to terms with changed realities. The men focus on building reserves of time, energy, and resources that belong to them alone, and that focus pays off in sustained well being. The women reflect on the value of earlier balance and the lessons that come when the market responds to collective choices. This exchange of experiences highlights the human element in what can feel like abstract shifts and reminds everyone that real people are living through these changes every day. As we continue, the central theme remains the same. Men have found their footing in independence, and that footing feels solid enough to maintain long term. They see the full picture of costs and benefits and make the call that protects their future without apology. This decision frees them to live in ways that suit their strengths and brings a level of contentment that grows with time. The women who share their side add the perspective of hindsight and adaptation, showing how awareness develops when options narrow and new paths must be forged. The combined narrative offers a straightforward look at how societies adjust when the balance of responsibilities reaches its natural limit and both sides learn to navigate the outcome. The economic realities in environments with high living costs only reinforce this trend because they make the provider role more burdensome than rewarding for the average man. When that burden includes lifelong commitments and asset risks without matching returns, the choice to step back becomes logical and widespread. Men apply that logic and report the positive effects in their daily lives, including more rest and personal freedom. Women encountering the shift describe the process of adjusting expectations and finding new sources of fulfillment that do not rely on the previous dynamic. This adaptation on both sides is what keeps the pattern stable, and it continues to unfold with each passing year. The deeper we examine the accounts, the more evident it becomes that this is a response rooted in self preservation rather than conflict. Men have observed the patterns and chosen the path that aligns with their capabilities and needs. They simplify their lives, remove unnecessary drains, and invest in what brings lasting satisfaction. The women who reach this stage bring reflections on timing and the importance of mutual contribution, and many apply those reflections to their current situations. The overall picture is one of honest recalibration, where each group responds to the realities they face, and the results reshape the landscape in lasting ways. This leads us to the point where the full scope of the change feels clear and irreversible for those who have lived it. Men remain committed because the peace they have gained outweighs the old pressures, and that commitment keeps the movement strong. They trust what they see and experience and act accordingly without second guessing. The women sharing their stories add layers of understanding about how life timelines interact with personal choices and the insights that emerge from that interaction. Together, these perspectives create a complete view of a transition that is both challenging and instructive for everyone paying attention. The pattern of men prioritizing their own stability continues because it delivers results they can measure directly in their health of finances and daily satisfaction. They build routines that support long term well being without the overlay of external demands that grew too heavy. This approach feels authentic to their nature and allows room for growth on their own terms. The women navigating the adjusted market bring their own experiences of reflection and adjustment, often noting how earlier assumptions about availability gave way to new realities that required different strategies. The interaction between these choices creates a dynamic where both sides learn and adapt in real time, and the outcomes continue to evolve accordingly. As the stories accumulate, The consistent outcome is men finding value in their independence and women gaining clarity through direct experience. The men focus on what they can control, and that focus yields steady peace and personal progress. They remove layers of obligation that no longer fit and embrace a lifestyle that suits them fully. The women reflect on the balance of contributions and the timing of life decisions, and many use those reflections to shape their next steps. This mutual process of learning is what defines the current phase, and it serves as a sobering example of how incentives and choices interact to produce lasting change. The economic and social factors at work here make the shift understandable once the full picture is considered. Men see the total cost of traditional roles and decide the protection of their own resources is the wiser course. They enjoy the freedom that comes with that decision and report higher levels of contentment as a result. Women who encounter this reality later describe the process of coming to terms with it and finding new ways to move forward that align with their current circumstances. The entire situation stands as a clear demonstration of how societies adjust when one side reaches its limit and the other side responds in kind. Continuing this way, we see how the stories from both sides add depth to the overall narrative without changing the core direction. Men stay the course because it works for them and the benefits compound over time. They maintain control over their time and resources, and that control brings a sense of security that feels earned. The women sharing their perspectives highlight the human side of adaptation and the insights that come from living through the change. This balanced exchange of experiences offers a full view of the transition and the lessons it holds for anyone willing to look closely. The accounts keep reinforcing the idea that men have made a deliberate choice based on observable realities, and that choice is holding firm. They prioritize self-reliance and the peace it brings, and they see no reason to reverse course. This decision frees them to pursue interests and goals that matter to them directly. The women who reflect on their side bring awareness of how timing and expectations interact, and many apply that awareness to their own paths forward. The combined effect is a recalibrated environment where both groups navigate new realities with the insights gained from experience. This brings the first part of the discussion to a natural pause where the patterns are clear and the outcomes are measurable. Men have walked away in significant numbers, and they are finding value in that path that keeps them committed. The women facing the adjusted landscape are adapting in their own ways and sharing the lessons that come with that adaptation. The overall message is one of straightforward cause and effect, where the push for certain dynamics met its natural limit and the response from men reshaped the field permanently. The situation in China and the stories emerging from it serve as a vivid example of how these forces play out in real life and what it means for the future of relationships and family formation. The next layer of this reality involves looking at how men are building their daily lives once they commit to independence and how that construction brings them the peace they sought. They focus on routines that emphasize health and personal interests, removing anything that adds unnecessary weight or complication. This minimalist approach allows them to rest when needed and invest energy in pursuits that recharge rather than deplete. They report feeling more in control and less burdened by expectations that previously felt endless. The women who observe this shift from their side often describe their own process of coming to terms with the change and finding new sources of fulfillment that do not depend on the old model. This parallel adaptation shows how both groups are responding to the same set of circumstances with different but valid strategies. The economic calculations that drive many of these decisions remain central because they make the choice to step back not only understandable, but practical. When the cost of marriage includes assets that take years to accumulate and the risk of division and divorce remains high, the average man sees little upside in proceeding. He instead directs his resources toward personal stability and future security that he controls directly. This decision compounds over time, leading to greater financial freedom and less stress from carrying loads that were never evenly shared. The women who reach this stage in life bring their reflections on how the balance of responsibilities needs to be mutual if partnerships are to last, and many are applying that insight to their current situations. The result is a clearer understanding across the board of what sustainable arrangements require in modern conditions. As more men embrace this path, the collective impact becomes visible in the numbers of singles and the conversations happening in public spaces. Men describe the relief of no longer feeling like the default provider and instead building lives that suit their own pace and priorities. They enjoy the freedom to travel, pursue hobbies, and rest without the constant pull of external demands. This lifestyle feels authentic and sustainable to them, and that authenticity keeps them committed. The women sharing their experiences add the perspective of hindsight and the practical adjustments they are making to navigate the new landscape. Their stories highlight the importance of timing and compromise and the clarity that comes when those elements are recognized earlier rather than later. The pattern of withdrawal is not driven by isolation, but by direct engagement with the realities of cost, risk, and return. Men apply logic to what they see around them and choose the option that protects their long term well being. They simplify their routines, focus on what brings genuine satisfaction, and avoid cycles that previously drained more than they returned. This choice leads to a level of peace that grows with time and reinforces their decision daily. The women who encounter this reality describe the process of realignment and the insights gained from living through it. They often note how earlier assumptions about endless options gave way to a more grounded view of what is possible and what requires mutual effort. This exchange of perspectives creates a fuller picture of the transition and the lessons it holds for everyone involved. The broader social effects of this shift touch everything from personal fulfillment to larger trends in family formation and economic activity. Yet, for the men who have made the choice, the outcome is often one of quiet contentment as they align their lives with what they can sustain comfortably. They trust their own assessment of the situation and act on it consistently without external pressure swaying them. The women navigating the adjusted market bring their own experiences of reflection and adaptation, showing how awareness develops when the landscape changes. The combined narrative offers a straightforward look at how incentives drive behavior and how people respond when those incentives favor independence on one side. This leads us deeper into the ways men are rediscovering their own strengths once they remove the layers of obligation that no longer serve them. They focus on self-reliance and the freedom it brings, allowing room for growth in areas that matter to them personally. This rediscovery feels natural because it aligns with their ability to handle reality directly and build stability from the ground up. They report higher levels of satisfaction as they shed what does not fit and embrace what does. The women who share their side of the story often reflect on the value of balance and the importance of recognizing limits before they are crossed. Their insights add depth to the overall picture and show how both groups are learning from the same set of circumstances in their own ways. The economic and cultural pressures that accelerated this trend in China are not unique to one place, but they are particularly visible there because of the rapid rise in living costs and shifting expectations. Men see the total burden and decide the protection of their peace is the priority. They build lives that allow for rest and personal progress without the weight of carrying everything alone. This decision brings them the space to enjoy simple luxuries and pursue interests that recharge them fully. The women facing this new reality describe the emotional and practical adjustments they are making and the clarity that comes with hindsight. Their stories highlight how timing plays a critical role and how earlier compromises might have led to different outcomes, but the market has already moved forward. As the accounts continue, the central truth remains that men have chosen a path that works for them and they intend to stay on it. They trust the evidence of their experiences and the math of long term outcomes over any call to return. This trust keeps them steady and content in their independence. The women who reflect on their journeys add the human element of adaptation and the lessons learned from living through the change. Together, these perspectives create a complete view of a transition that is both sobering and full of practical insights for anyone willing to engage with it honestly. The stories from this environment keep showing how men are thriving in their chosen lifestyle by focusing on what they can control and letting go of what they cannot. They simplify their daily routines, remove unnecessary complications, and invest in health hobbies and personal goals that deliver steady returns. This approach brings them a level of peace that feels earned and sustainable over the long term. The women who share their experiences bring awareness of how the balance of contributions matters and the adjustments required when that balance shifts. Their reflections add important layers to the narrative and show how everyone involved is navigating the new realities in their own way. This brings the first 3,000 words to a close, with the patterns clear and the outcomes visible for those paying attention. The men have walked away in significant numbers, and they are finding real value in that decision every day. The women facing the adjusted landscape are adapting with the insights gained from experience, and the market continues to reflect those choices. The situation serves as a straightforward example of how expectations evolve when tested against real world pressures and how both sides respond when the balance reaches its natural limit. The full story continues from here with even more depth on how these dynamics play out over time and what it means for the future ahead. The shift we are witnessing is not some sudden rebellion, but the quiet, logical conclusion of decades where one side kept adding requirements while the other side kept absorbing the costs until absorption became impossible. Men looked at the scoreboard, saw that every play they made cost them more than it returned, and they simply stopped playing the game. They did not announce it with marches or manifestos. They just stopped showing up, stopped initiating, stopped offering, stopped volunteering to be the mule that carries everything uphill so someone else can enjoy the view from the top. And once that happened, the entire landscape started to look different almost overnight, even though the change had been building for 25 years. Look at what men actually do when they walk away. They do not become hermits living in caves. They build clean, efficient, low maintenance lives that feel like breathing after holding their breath for too long. A guy in his 30s who used to chase promotions, partly so he could afford the apartment women expected, now works a steady job that pays enough for him to cover his own rent, eat good food, keep his car running, and put money aside every month without stress. He comes home to a small but organized place. No drama waiting for him at the door. No passive aggressive texts about why he did not text back fast enough. No arguments over money because there is no second person spending what he earns. He cooks a steak, watches whatever he wants, lifts weights in his living room, scrolls through car forums or gaming streams, goes to bed when he feels like it, and wakes up without dread. That routine sounds basic because it is. But after years of feeling like every day was a performance review he never signed up for, basic feels like winning the lottery. Another man in his late 20s who used to spend weekends driving across town for dates that never went anywhere now spends those same hours riding his motorcycle on back roads or working on side projects that might turn into real money someday. He does not need to impress anyone with bottle service or concert tickets. He does not need to prove he is provider material because he opted out of the provider audition entirely. His social circle is smaller but tighter. Guys who respect his time, guys who do not judge him for not chasing women, guys who understand why he stopped playing a rigged game. They grab beers, talk about real things, laugh hard, and go home without anyone owing anyone else anything. That kind of connection does not drain him, it recharges him. And recharges exactly what men need after years of being told their natural instincts are toxic. The women who are now hitting 35 and realizing the math is not in their favor often point to the same handful of factors. They say men are intimidated by successful women. They say men want younger models. They say society conditioned men to fear commitment. Those explanations feel comforting because they keep the responsibility external. But when you listen to what men actually say when they are not performing for an audience, the answer is simpler and more brutal. The math stopped adding up. Full stop. A man earning average money cannot realistically provide the lifestyle many women still expect while also protecting himself from catastrophic loss in divorce court. He cannot afford to lose half his assets, pay alimony, child support, and still have enough left to rebuild his life from zero if things go south. And the odds say things often do go south when 50% of marriages end and when the financial outcome for men is predictably worse than for women. Rational actors stop signing the contract. They do not hate women. They just stopped volunteering to be the one who gets bled dry when the contract breaks. This is where the sobering part really lands. Men are not walking away because they hate women. They are walking away because they finally believed what women spent decades telling them. You are not needed. You are toxic. Your masculinity is problematic. Your provider role is outdated. Fine. Message received. If the role is outdated, then men updated their behavior to match. They removed themselves from the equation. And now, the women who spent years celebrating that removal are discovering what the world looks like when the men who used to step forward no longer do. It is not revenge. It is consequence, straight cause and effect. Push hard enough in one direction, long enough, and the pendulum does not swing back gently. It swings hard the other way, or it breaks off entirely. And take the stories coming out of urban centers right now. Women posting videos from their apartments saying they cannot understand why no one approaches them anymore. They are educated, they have good jobs, they look after themselves, they are independent. All true. But independence was sold as the ultimate virtue. And now it is the only thing many of them have left to offer in the marketplace. Men see that and think, okay, if her presence is the table, then I already have my own table. I built it myself. It is sturdy. It does not need another person sitting at it demanding I pay for their meal while they tell me how entitled they are to sit there. That thought process is not cruel. It is protective. Men learned that offering a seat at their table often meant someone else eating everything on the plate and then complaining that the portions were too small. Another layer that gets overlooked is how men rediscovered value in things that do not require female approval. A guy who used to measure his worth by how many women swiped right now measures it by how much he can bench press, or how much he saved this month, or how many miles he ran without stopping. Those metrics are objective. They do not ghost him. They do not move the goalposts. They do not tell him he is toxic for wanting respect. They just exist. Hit the number or do not. No drama, no negotiation. That shift in what counts as success is massive. It takes the power to define his value out of the hands of people who kept changing the definition and puts it back where it belongs. In his own judgment. Once a man trusts his own judgment again, he stops outsourcing his self-worth to a system that was never designed to give him a fair score. Women who are now vocal about their loneliness sometimes frame it as men punishing them for having standards. That framing misses the point entirely. Men are not punishing anyone. They are refusing to be punished anymore. Refusing to be the crash test dummy for someone else's endless quest for better. Refusing to be the emotional tampon, the walking ATM, the ego boost between better options. refusing to sign up for a role where the job description keeps getting longer while the compensation keeps getting shorter. When men see that pattern clearly, they do what any rational person does. They exit. They do not scream. They do not beg. They do not negotiate. They leave. And once enough of them leave, the market collapses under its own weight. The collapse shows up in small ways at first: fewer first dates, fewer engagements, fewer weddings, fewer births, empty playgrounds in neighborhoods that used to be full of young families, matchmaking services with wait lists full of women and almost no men signing up, dating apps where women outnumber men 5 to 1 in the over 30 bracket and still complain about not so good options. The options did not disappear. The men who used to be options simply stopped being available. They are not hiding, they are visible. They are at the gym, they are on the trails, they are building businesses, they are traveling solo. They are living lives that do not revolve around courtship anymore. And they look content, not miserable, not angry, content. That contentment is what stings the most for people who expected them to be broken without female attention. They are not broken, they are repaired. Men who have been out of the game for a few years often describe a strange clarity that settles in after the initial withdrawal. At first, there is a void. The habits of chasing approval are hard to break. But once the void fills with things they actually enjoy, the clarity becomes permanent. They realize how much mental bandwidth was consumed by decoding signals, planning dates, worrying about rejection, managing expectations, paying for everything, and hoping for reciprocation that rarely came. When all of that disappears, the mind becomes quiet. Quiet enough to hear their own thoughts again. Quiet enough to notice how tired they were. Quiet enough to feel gratitude for simple things like sleeping through the night without anxiety. That quiet is addictive. Once a man tastes it, he does not want to go back to the noise. The noise is exactly what many women are experiencing now. The silence from men who used to pursue them feels deafening. They reach out to friends who say the same thing. No one is asking them out. No one is sliding into their messages. No one is offering to pay for dinner just to spend time with them. The attention they used to take for granted is gone, and the absence forces a confrontation with reality. The reality is that attention was never free. It always came with a price tag. Men paid that price in time, money, emotional labor, risk, and opportunity cost. When men stopped paying the price, the attention dried up. Not because men hate women, because men learned that paying the price rarely led to anything worth having. So they kept their money, their time, their energy, and their peace, and they invested all of it in themselves. This investment pays dividends that compound quietly. A man who stops spending on dates can save for a house or a business or early retirement. A man who stops chasing validation can focus on skills that actually increase his income. A man who stops worrying about female approval can speak his mind without filtering every word. A man who stops carrying the emotional load for two people can carry more for himself. The results show up in better health, better finances, better friendships, better hobbies, better sleep, better everything. Not flashy, not broadcasted, just better. And that better life does not need external applause to feel real. Women who see this happening sometimes react with anger. They call it selfish. They call it immature. They call it the death of society. But anger is usually the first stage of grief, and what they are grieving is the loss of a world where their options felt infinite and their leverage felt permanent. That world is gone. The leverage shifted because men stopped accepting the terms. They did not negotiate new terms. They did not demand equality. They simply withdrew their participation. Withdrawal is the most powerful move when negotiation is pointless. You cannot negotiate with someone who is no longer at the table. And men left the table in large enough numbers that the table itself is starting to wobble. The wobble shows up in fertility rates dropping below replacement in country after country. It shows up in housing markets where large family homes sit empty while single men buy smaller places or live with roommates to save money. It shows up in consumer spending where luxury brands that used to market to couples now target solo men who have disposable income and no dependents. It shows up in social media where women post videos asking where all the good men went while the good men are outside living lives that do not include them. The question, where did they go, has an answer. They went home, they went to the gym, they went to work on their own projects, they went anywhere that does not require them to audition for a role they no longer want. This is not the end of men and women interacting forever. People will still date, people will still marry, people will still have children, but the volume is lower, the intensity is lower, the assumptions are lower, the entitlement is lower. Men who do choose to engage do so from a position of strength. They have options, they have peace, they have zero desperation. That changes the dynamic completely. A man who does not need to be in a relationship is not willing to accept bad terms just to be in one. He waits. He walks away faster. He enforces boundaries without apology. Women who want partnership now have to bring more to the table than presence and a list of demands. The market corrected itself through absence, and the correction is painful, but it is real. The pain is what makes this a wake-up call, not just for women, but for anyone who thought the old rules would last forever. The old rules were built on imbalance. One side gave disproportionately, the other side received disproportionately. When the giving side finally said enough, the imbalance collapsed. Collapse always hurts the side that benefited most from the imbalance. That is physics, that is economics, that is human nature. Men are not gloating. Most of them are too busy living to spend time gloating. They are resting, they are building, they are healing, they are finding out what life feels like when the default is peace instead of performance. And that discovery is what keeps them gone. Not anger, not bitterness, peace. Real, earned, quiet peace, the kind of peace you do not trade away once you have it, the kind of peace that makes every previous sacrifice look like a bad investment. And men looked at the return on investment for traditional courtship and family life under modern conditions and saw negative equity. So they sold, they cashed out, they took the loss early and instead of bleeding out slowly over decades. Smart money moves first. Men moved first. Now the market reflects that move. Women who are honest with themselves are starting to admit the game changed. Some are lowering standards quietly. Some are focusing on their own peace instead of chasing partnership. Some are angry and doubling down on blame, but the honest ones see the pattern and adjust. They realize that independence cuts both ways. If a woman does not need a man, then a man does not need to be needed. If her presence is enough, then his absence is also enough. If she can thrive alone, then he can thrive alone. The logic is symmetric. The outcomes are not always equal because biology and timelines do not treat both sexes the same. But the choice to walk away is available to both. Men took it in larger numbers because the costs hit them harder. Now, both sides live with the consequences. The consequences are not abstract. They are concrete. Fewer marriages mean fewer stable households. Fewer stable households mean fewer children born into stable environments. Fewer children mean aging populations faster than economies can adjust. Faster aging means more pressure on social systems. More pressure means higher taxes. Higher taxes mean less disposable income for everyone. Less disposable income means tighter lives for the next generation. The chain reaction is already visible in countries furthest along this path. Japan, South Korea, parts of Europe, urban China, the United States is not far behind. The trend is global because the incentives are global. When the cost-benefit analysis for men turns negative, the behavior changes everywhere. The analysis is done honestly, and honesty is the key word. Men stop lying to themselves about what the deal really was. They stopped pretending the risks were small. Stop pretending the rewards were large. Stop pretending the game was fair. Once honesty became the default, the old illusions collapsed. Illusions are fragile. Truth is durable. Men chose durable over fragile. They chose observable reality over promised potential. They chose peace over promises, and they are not going back because promises never paid the bills. Peace does. This is the hard part for many to accept. The men are not coming back under the old terms, not because they are spiteful, because the old terms are no longer acceptable. Acceptable means sustainable. Sustainable means the gains outweigh the losses over time. The losses outweighed the gains for too long, so the terms changed, not through discussion, through defection, mass defection. When enough defect the system they defected from either adapts or dies. Adaptation requires meeting reality where it is. Reality right now is men have tasted life without the old burdens, and they prefer it. Preference is stronger than guilt. Preference is stronger than shame. Preference is stronger than social pressure. Men prefer their current lives. That preference is the new foundation. On that foundation, men are building something different. Not a movement, not a cult, just individual lives that add up to a pattern. The pattern is visible. The pattern is peaceful. The pattern is self-contained. The pattern does not need external validation to continue. That is why it will continue. Self-contained systems outlast dependent ones. Men became self-contained. They no longer depend on female approval for identity or purpose. They generate both internally. Internal generation is infinite. External approval is finite and fickle. Men chose infinite. Women who want to reverse the trend have one realistic path. Change the incentives, lower the costs, increase the returns. Make partnership net positive for men again. That means shared financial responsibility, shared risk, shared emotional labor, shared everything, not just in theory, in practice, in contracts, in courts, in daily life. Until that happens, the defection continues. Men do not hate the players. They hate the game. So they stop playing. The field is empty now. The women who remain on it are starting to notice how quiet it is. Quiet is sobering. Quiet forces reflection. Reflection is where real change starts or where regret deepens. The choice belongs to whoever is left standing on the field. The real kicker comes when you realize this isn't just about dating or marriage anymore. It's about an entire generation of men rewriting what value actually means to them and doing it without asking permission from anyone. They stopped measuring success by how many women approve of them and started measuring it by how little bullshit they have to tolerate on a daily basis. That single pivot changes everything downstream. A man who no longer sees female attention as the ultimate scorecard suddenly has bandwidth for things he used to push aside. He picks up an instrument he dropped in college because that he was too busy chasing tail. He starts a side hustle that actually pays instead of pouring that energy into curating the perfect dating profile. He trains harder in the gym because the mirror is the only judge who matters now. He reads books that expand his mind instead of scrolling through feeds designed to keep him anxious and insecure. Every hour he reclaims from the old game gets reinvested into himself. And the compound interest on that reinvestment is brutal in the best possible way. Women watching this from the outside sometimes describe it as men becoming selfish. But selfishness implies taking from others. These men aren't taking, they're keeping what was always theirs and simply refusing to hand it over anymore. They kept their money, kept their time, kept their emotional reserves, kept their mental real estate. No one is poor because a man decided not to spend his Saturday buying drinks for someone who might ghost him on Monday. No one is deprived because he chose to buy tools for his workshop instead of flowers for a third date that was never going to turn into anything real. The only thing being withheld is the labor attention, and resources that used to flow one way by default. When that flow stops, the system that depended on it starts to sputter. And sputter it does. You see it in the statistics that keep coming out year after year. Marriage rates keep sliding. First marriage age keeps climbing for those who still do it. Birth rates in developed countries are so far below replacement that governments are throwing money at the problem and getting almost no traction. Policymakers talk about incentives for families, tax breaks for children, subsidized daycare, paid leave. None of it moves the needle much because the bottleneck isn't money. The bottleneck is trust. Men no longer trust the institution enough to sign up for it under the current rules. They see the divorce data, the custody data, the alimony data, the child support enforcement data, the false accusation data, the social shaming data, and they conclude that the upside does not outweigh the downside. Not even close. So they stay out, not out of hatred, out of arithmetic. Arithmetic is merciless. A 35-year-old man earning median income looks at the cost of a house in a decent school district, multiplies it by the mortgage rate, adds property taxes, adds utilities, adds groceries for two or three, adds health insurance, adds car payments if kids are involved, adds extracurriculars, adds college savings if he's feeling optimistic, adds the statistical probability of losing half of everything in a split, adds ongoing payments for years afterward, and the calculator spits out a number that says, walk away. He doesn't need a TED talk to explain it. He doesn't need a podcast to validate it. The spreadsheet does the talking. And once the spreadsheet says no, the conversation is over. Meanwhile, the women who bought into the narrative that career and independence would always be enough are hitting the same spreadsheet from the other direction and getting a different kind of shock. They were told they could delay family until their education and professional milestones were locked in. They were told 35 was the new 25. They were told biology would cooperate with ambition. Then 35 arrives, 38 arrives, 40 arrives, and the biology does not send a polite email saying it changed its mind. It just closes the window, quietly, without negotiation. And suddenly, the pool of men who are still open to family formation is tiny, older, pickier, and largely uninterested in catching up on someone else's timeline. The men who wanted kids already had them or already decided against them. The ones still on the fence see the age gap, see the career demands, see the pre existing expectations, and decide the math doesn't work for them either. Another door closes. This is where the raw part really sinks in. Time is not democratic. It does not distribute itself equally. Men can father children into their 50s and 60s if they want to. Women cannot. That asymmetry was always there, but society spent decades pretending it wasn't relevant anymore because empowerment narratives needed it to be irrelevant. Now reality is reasserting itself without apology, and the women who bet heaviest on the irrelevance argument are the ones feeling the sting most acutely. They aren't wrong to have chased careers and independence. Those things have value, but they aren't infinite substitutes for family if family was ever part of the plan. When the plan changes mid game because the clock doesn't care about the plan, the adjustment is brutal. No amount of likes, promotions, or Instagram followers fills that particular void. Men who opted out early avoid that void entirely. They never banked on a future that required someone else's cooperation to materialize. They built futures that depend only on their own consistency. A paid off condo, a growing investment account, a network of reliable friends, skills that keep paying whether the economy is up or down, health that lets them enjoy what they built, purpose that comes from mastery instead of validation. These things do not evaporate when a relationship ends. They do not get divided in court. They do not require someone else's signature to exist. That permanence is intoxicating once a man experiences it. He looks back at the years he spent auditioning for approval and wonders why he ever thought that was normal. Normal is being redefined right in front of us. The old normal was men pursuing, women gatekeeping, men providing, women selecting. The new normal is men abstaining, women scrambling, men self validating, women reevaluating. Neither side is particularly happy about the transition, but men seem to have landed on their feet faster because they had lower expectations to begin with. They were never promised a soulmate on demand. They were never told the world owed them partnership. They were told to work hard, earn money, be useful, and maybe someone would choose them. When the choosing stopped happening on fair terms, they stopped waiting to be chosen. They chose themselves. That choice turned out to be the best one they ever made. Women who are still in the arena sometimes try to shame men back into the game. They post about how lonely they are, how men are failing society, how real men step up, how masculinity is in crisis. Those messages bounce off now. The men reading them already ran the numbers. They know the crisis isn't masculinity. The crisis is a system that asked one side to shoulder infinite risk for finite reward and then acted surprised when that side said no thanks. Shaming only works when the target still cares about the shame giver's opinion. Men stopped caring, not out of spite, out of indifference. Indifference is stronger than hate because hate requires energy. Indifference requires nothing. It just is. And that indifference scales. One man walks away quietly. 10 men walk away quietly. 1,000 men walk away quietly. Suddenly, the social pressure that used to keep men in line evaporates. No one is there to enforce the old rules because the enforcers are gone. No one is there to police the behavior because the police quit. The culture that used to run on male obligation runs out of fuel. What fills the vacuum is whatever people build when they are no longer obligated to build for someone else. For men, that usually means simplicity, competence, and solitude that isn't lonely. They find brotherhood in shared interests instead of shared suffering. They find purpose in creation instead of provision. They find rest in silence instead of constant negotiation. The women left holding the old expectations start to build something different too, whether they want to or not. Some double down on independence and make it work. They buy their own homes, stack their own wealth, cultivate their own circles, and redefine fulfillment on their terms. Others try to pivot back toward partnership, but discover the men they want are no longer auditioning. The men who are still open to partnership tend to be the ones who never fully bought the old script or who got lucky early. The rest are content where they are. Contentment is the enemy of desperation, and desperation was the fuel that kept the old engine running. Without desperation, the engine stalls. Stalled engines make a lot of noise before they stop completely. You hear the noise in the viral posts, the think pieces, the podcast rants, the matchmaking horror stories. Everyone is trying to diagnose why the machine broke. Feminism, social media, economic inequality, porn, video games, therapy culture, dating apps, pick your villain. The reality is simpler and less satisfying. The machine broke because the parts stopped fitting together. One side kept upgrading its requirements, while the other side kept downgrading its tolerance for risk. Eventually, the tolerance hit zero. Zero is a hard limit. You cannot negotiate with zero. You can only accept it or pretend it isn't there. Pretending is getting harder every year. Every year, the cohort of men who grew up watching their fathers, uncles, brothers, and friends get financially and emotionally gutted in family court gets larger. Every year, the stories of false accusations, weaponized allegations, endless child support battles, and asset stripping become more normalized. Every year, the internet makes those stories impossible to ignore. Boys who are 12 today will be 25 in 13 years. They are already absorbing the lesson that participation carries catastrophic downside with no guaranteed upside. They are not going to unsee that lesson just because society decides to rebrand marriage as empowering again. They will carry the pattern recognition into adulthood. And pattern recognition is the death of naive optimism. Naive optimism was what kept the old system alive long after the cracks appeared. Men kept signing up because they believed the good ones would be rewarded. They believed love would conquer logistics. They believed courts were fair. They believed society valued their contribution. Belief is powerful until reality disproves it enough times. Reality has been disproving it consistently for 2 decades. The men who needed the most disproving have already seen enough. The younger ones are inheriting the skepticism preloaded. That preloading means lower participation rates for the next generation. Lower participation means fewer families. Fewer families means demographic contraction. Demographic contraction means economic strain. Economic strain means political instability. The chain is long, but it starts with the same decision. No. No is a complete sentence now. Men say it without explanation because explanation invites negotiation, and negotiation invites manipulation. They say no by not texting back, no by not swiping right, no by not asking for the number, no by not offering to pay, no by not committing, no by not showing up. No does not require justification when the default used to be yes. The default flipped. The burden of proof is now on the side that wants the yes. That side is discovering how heavy proof can be when the other side has already decided the case is closed. Closed cases do not reopen easily. Men who have tasted freedom do not volunteer for captivity again unless the terms are rewritten from scratch. Rewriting from scratch requires admitting the old terms were unfair. Admitting unfairness requires dismantling systems that still benefit from the unfairness. Dismantling those systems requires political will, cultural buy-in, and legal reform on a scale that no one is seriously attempting. So the case stays closed. Men stay gone. And the women who assumed the door would always be open are left knocking on wood that no longer answers. Knocking turns into frustration. Frustration turns into anger. Anger turns into blame. Blame turns into coping. Coping looks different for different people. Some women lean harder into career and friendships. Some adopt pets or travel or creative projects. Some go overseas looking for men who haven't been through the same cultural grinder. Some lower standards quietly and hope no one notices. Some stay angry and broadcast it. None of those paths are inherently wrong. They are just paths that exist because the original path narrowed to a trail and then to a dead end. Dead ends force rerouting. Rerouting is exhausting, but it beats standing still forever. Men aren't standing still. They are moving, not toward women, toward themselves, toward projects that pay dividends without emotional overhead, toward health that compounds without negotiation, toward wealth that accumulates without cosigners, toward peace that doesn't require anyone else's signature. That movement is quiet, but it is relentless. Relentless movement in one direction eventually becomes momentum. Momentum becomes inertia. Inertia becomes the new normal. The new normal does not include mass re-engagement under the old rules. It includes selective engagement under new rules or no engagement at all. Selective engagement favors men who have options and standards. They approach when they want to, not because they have to. They stay when it adds value, not because leaving would be shameful. They leave when it subtracts value without guilt. That selectivity feels like power because it is power. Power that was never supposed to be unilateral. But when one side abdicated its half of the bargain, the other side picked up the slack by simply refusing to play. Refusal is power too. Quiet, boring, devastating power. Devastating because it exposes how much of the old social order rested on men's willingness to keep playing a losing hand. Once that willingness vanished, the order started to crumble from the edges inward. Edges crumble first in any structure. The center holds longer, but it cannot hold forever without reinforcement. Reinforcement is not coming. Men are not reinforcing a structure that punishes them for participating. They are building their own smaller, stronger structures. Structures that do not collapse when someone walks away. Structures that do not require constant maintenance from someone else. Structures that stand alone. Standing alone sounds bleak until you do it for a while. Then it sounds like freedom. Freedom to fail without dragging someone else down. Freedom to succeed without someone else claiming half. Freedom to rest without being accused of laziness. Freedom to grow without being told the growth is toxic. Freedom to exist without constant performance review. That freedom is what men are protecting now. They protect it the same way they protect anything valuable, by keeping it away from people who have proven they will devalue it. Devaluation was the default setting for too long. Masculinity was toxic. Provision was patriarchy. Protection was control. Pursuit was harassment. Commitment was entrapment. Every positive trait got reframed as a negative until men internalized the message. Then they acted on it. If they are toxic, then let them be toxic somewhere else. If they are not needed, then let them go where they are needed by themselves. If their presence is optional, then make their absence permanent. The logic is airtight. Airtight logic does not bend to feelings, it simply is. And that is where we are. A generation of men living according to airtight logic, while the rest of society tries to guilt them back into a game that stopped making sense years ago. Guilt works until it doesn't. It stopped working. Now the only thing left is adaptation or denial. Denial is shrinking. Adaptation is growing. Adaptation on the women's side looks like self-sufficiency, redefined priorities, international dating, or honest reckoning with what they bring to a partnership beyond credentials and appearance. Adaptation on the men's side looks like continued withdrawal, selective participation, or complete disengagement. Both adaptations are rational, given the incentives. Neither is particularly romantic. Romance requires mutual investment. Mutual investment requires mutual trust. Trust evaporated when the risks became too lopsided. Lopsided risks produce lopsided outcomes. The outcome right now is men thriving in solitude while women grapple with unexpected solitude. Thriving in solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is absence of connection. Solitude is presence of self. Men found the self they lost while chasing connection that was never reciprocal enough to justify the chase. Finding the self is euphoric in a quiet way. Quiet euphoria does not make headlines. It just sustains itself indefinitely. Indefinite sustainability is the goal now. Men are building lives they can maintain for decades without external crutches. No partner needed to feel complete. No children needed to feel purposeful. No social approval needed to feel worthy. Completion, purpose, and worth come from within. Internal sources are reliable. External sources are fickle. Men chose reliable. That choice is paying off every single day, paying off in small increments that add up to massive differences. A man who used to spend $300 on a date now invests $300 in index funds. A man who used to lose sleep over mixed signals now sleeps 8 hours without interruption. A man who used to filter every thought through the lens of how it would be received now speaks plainly and lets the chips fall. A man who used to measure his weekend by whether he got laid now measures it by whether he finished a project or hit a personal record. Those small shifts compound into a life that feels owned instead of rented. Rented lives collapse when the landlord raises the rent or changes the terms. Owned lives endure because the owner sets the terms. Men became owners. They set the terms. The terms are simple. Peace first, everything else optional. Optional means no guilt when it is declined. No guilt means no leverage. No leverage means no coercion. Coercion was the glue that held the old dynamic together. Without it, the dynamic fell apart. It is still falling apart. The falling will continue until the incentives change or until the population adjusts to a new equilibrium where partnership is rare, selective, and genuinely mutual. Genuine mutuality is what men say they would return for. Not obligation, not guilt, not societal pressure, mutuality, shared risk, shared reward, shared effort, shared respect. Until that exists in a verifiable way, the default remains no. No is not cruel. No is honest. Honesty is what men are choosing over everything else now. They are choosing honest solitude over dishonest companionship. They are choosing honest self reliance over dishonest interdependence. They are choosing honest peace over dishonest performance. Peace is winning. And winning quietly is the ultimate flex in a world that used to demand loud proof of value. Men no longer need to prove anything to anyone except themselves. That proof is internal. It is undeniable. It is permanent. Permanent wins out over temporary every time. Men learned that the hard way. Now they live it, and living it looks a lot like freedom. The fallout from all this isn't confined to bedrooms and dating apps. It spills into every corner of how societies function when half the population quietly checks out of the traditional family formation contract. Cities that used to hum with young couples pushing strollers now have quieter parks on weekends. Elementary schools in middle class neighborhoods that once had waiting lists for kindergarten spots are running at 70% capacity and still dropping. Real estate developers who built 5-bedroom houses on speculation are sitting on inventory because the people who used to buy those houses aren't forming the households that need 5 bedrooms anymore. The economic signals are blunt. When fewer people pair up and reproduce on the old schedule, demand for certain kinds of housing collapses, school district funding shrinks, local businesses that cater to families lose revenue, and the tax base that supports everything from roads to hospitals starts to erode from below. Governments notice, they notice hard. Japan has been living this reality longer than most places, and the response has been a parade of increasingly desperate policy experiments. Subsidies for dating events, cash bonuses for marriage, extra payments per child, tax credits that scale with family size, extended parental leave that nobody takes because the jobs still punish anyone who actually uses it. Fertility has kept falling anyway. South Korea doubled down harder. Bigger bonuses, free housing lotteries for newlyweds, national matchmaking programs run by the government itself. And the birth rate still hit 0.72 children per woman last year. The numbers do not lie. Money thrown at the symptom does nothing when the root cause is a collapse in trust between the sexes. Trust cannot be purchased with tax credits. It has to be rebuilt through changed behavior, changed laws, changed cultural defaults. None of those changes are happening at scale because the people who benefit from the current imbalance have no incentive to dismantle it. Men see those failed experiments and take notes. They watch prime ministers beg young people to have babies, and they shrug. The begging confirms what they already concluded. The system knows it's in trouble, but has no real plan beyond bribes that don't address the underlying math. The math still says that for the average man, entering marriage and fatherhood under present conditions is a high stakes gamble where the house always wins in the long run. So they keep declining the gamble. Declining en masse creates its own momentum. Each additional man who opts out lowers the social pressure on the next man to opt in. Peer effects are powerful. When your friends are all single, financially stable, traveling, pursuing hobbies, and visibly content, the idea of signing up for 25 years of financial exposure and emotional labor starts to look less like maturity and more like voluntary self harm. Voluntary self harm is exactly how many men now describe the old path. They talk about uncles who worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years, handed over most of the paycheck, lost the house and half their pension in the divorce, and now live in a one-bedroom apartment while still paying support for kids who barely speak to them. They talk about coworkers who were model husbands and fathers until the wife decided she was no longer happy, filed, took the kids, took the dog, took the savings, and left him with court-mandated therapy bills on top of everything else. They talk about friends who proposed, planned the wedding, bought the ring, paid for the honeymoon, only to have the engagement called off 3 weeks before the date with no refund on deposits and no explanation beyond, I need to find myself. These are not rare horror stories anymore. They are the background radiation of male life in 2026. Young men absorb them the way previous generations absorbed war stories. This is what happens when you step into the arena. So they stay out of the arena. Staying out looks different for different men, but the core pattern is consistent. They prioritize assets that cannot be easily divided or seized. Bitcoin in cold storage, precious metals in a safe, offshore accounts where local courts have no reach, skills that travel with them, coding, welding, commercial piloting, medical diagnostics, because portable skills mean portable income. Physical fitness, because a strong body is the one asset no one can take in a settlement. Mental resilience, because emotional armor protects against manipulation. These are not the flashy flexes of a decade ago. They are quiet fortifications built against a world that has proven it will strip a man bare if he lets his guard down. Women who are paying attention notice the fortifications. They notice men who used to be open books now keep their finances private from day one. They notice conversations that used to flow easily now have hard boundaries around money, living arrangements, and future plans. They notice that when they ask about long-term goals, the answer is often, I'm good where I am, instead of build a family. The shift in language is subtle but total. Men no longer speak in we terms until there is ironclad evidence that we is safe. They speak in I terms because I is the only entity they fully trust. Trust earned through repeated betrayal is hard to rebuild. Many men have decided it is not worth the effort. Easier to maintain distance than to risk another round of vulnerability followed by devastation. Devastation is the word that keeps surfacing in men's private conversations, not anger, devastation, the kind of hit that takes years to recover from financially and psychologically. Men who have taken that hit or watch close friends take it develop a kind of survivor wisdom. They share it in closed groups, on anonymous forums, in late night talks over whiskey. The wisdom boils down to 3 rules. Never cohabitate without ironclad legal protection. Never marry without a prenup that courts will actually enforce. Never have children without a paternity test and a clear custody agreement in advance. Those rules sound cold on paper. In context, they are survival tactics. When the default outcome of trust is devastation, cold tactics become rational. Rationality is spreading upward through age groups. Teenage boys are already internalizing versions of these rules before they even date. They see older brothers and cousins go through the grinder and they listen. They watch viral clips of men explaining post-divorce life and they file it away. They read the statistics on suicide rates among divorced men, on homelessness spikes after separation, on mental health collapses that follow asset loss. They do not need to experience the pain personally to learn from it. Observational learning is efficient. They apply the lesson early. Do not enter contracts where the counterparty can unilaterally destroy you and walk away with most of the value. That lesson sticks. It shapes behavior before the first serious relationship even begins. Behavior shaped early compounds over decades. A 20-year-old who internalizes low trust in institutions will approach 25 differently than his father did. He will date casually or not at all. He will live cheaply and invest aggressively. He will avoid entanglements that could derail his trajectory. By 30, he will have a net worth that puts him ahead of his peers who followed the old script. By 40, he will have freedom most people only dream of. Freedom buys options. Options reduce desperation. Reduced desperation means he can walk away from any situation that starts to smell like the old trap. Walking away becomes his default setting. The more men adopt that default, the more the market for traditional commitment shrinks. Shrinking markets force adaptation on the other side. Some women adapt by becoming radically self sufficient. They buy property solo, build six-figure careers, create chosen families with friends, freeze eggs early, pursue single motherhood by choice when they hit the wall. Others adapt by searching outside their home culture for men who still operate under older incentives. Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, places where economic asymmetry still gives Western women leverage they no longer have domestically. The phenomenon is visible enough that airlines report spikes in solo female travel to certain regions, and matchmaking agencies now openly market international options to women over 35. Adaptation is happening. It is just not the adaptation society expected when it sold independence as the ultimate liberation. Liberation has a price tag. The price is solitude for those who want partnership but cannot find it under equitable terms. Solitude is not always suffering. Many women report discovering strength they never knew they had when they stopped waiting for a man to complete the picture. They travel alone, eat alone, build alone, grieve alone, celebrate alone, and eventually thrive alone. Thriving alone is real. It is just not what was advertised when the independence campaign was at full volume. The campaign promised empowerment plus partnership. Reality delivered empowerment minus partnership for a large cohort. Minus is a heavy subtraction when the plus was taken for granted. Taken for granted things are the hardest to lose. Women who assumed attention, pursuit, provision, and commitment were permanent features of the landscape are now confronting their absence. Absence creates a vacuum. Vacuum pulls in reflection, regret, anger, bargaining, acceptance, in whatever order the individual experiences them. Acceptance often arrives last and looks like a quiet recalibration. I will build my life without counting on a plus one to make it whole. That recalibration is painful, but it is also liberating in its own way. Liberating because it ends the cycle of hope followed by disappointment. Disappointment is exhausting. Ending it feels like setting down a weight that has been carried too long. Men set their weight down earlier. They set it down when they realized the weight was never going to be shared fairly. Setting it down gave them energy they did not know they had. Energy went into fitness, learning, earning, creating, resting. Rest is the part that surprises them most. They never knew how tired they were until they stopped running the endless race. The race was not just financial, it was emotional, social, psychological. Every interaction carried the subtext of evaluation. Am I enough? The question vanished when they stopped seeking the evaluation. No evaluator, no question. No question, no anxiety. No anxiety, space for actual living. Actual living looks mundane from the outside. Coffee at sunrise, a long walk with no destination, fixing something broken with his own hands. Cooking a meal slowly because there is no rush. Reading a book cover to cover without interruption. Sleeping in because no one is waiting. Mundane becomes sacred when it is chosen instead of endured. Chosen mundanity is the luxury men are hoarding now. They hoard it because they know how quickly it can be taken away if they let the old patterns creep back in. Creeping patterns are what women sometimes try to reintroduce. They reach out after years of silence with nostalgia laced messages. They reminisce about good times that were never as good as memory paints them. They hint at second chances. Men who have tasted chosen solitude rarely bite. They respond politely or not at all. Politeness is the last vestige of social conditioning. Non response is the honest evolution beyond it. Either way, the door stays closed. Closed doors teach lessons too. The lesson for women is that nostalgia is not currency. It does not buy entry when the occupant has already moved on to a better address. Better address is the mental model now. Men relocated their psychological headquarters from external validation to internal sovereignty. Sovereignty is non negotiable. Negotiating it means surrendering it. Surrender is off the table. That stance looks rigid from the outside. Inside, it feels like integrity. Integrity is non transferable. It belongs to the man who earned it through loss and recovery. Recovery forged something harder than what was there before. Harder things do not bend easily, they break before they bend. Men prefer not to break again, so they stay hard. Hardness is not cruelty, it is clarity. Clarity says, this is what I require to participate. If the requirements cannot be met, then no participation. No participation means no pretense. No pretense means no wasted time. Time is the ultimate non renewable resource. Men who learn that lesson the hard way guard their time like treasure. They spend it on what returns value to them. Value is defined narrowly now. Health, wealth, knowledge, peace, brotherhood, anything outside those categories gets minimal allocation or none at all. Minimal allocation extends to social media. Many men have deleted apps or reduced usage to near zero. The feeds were engineered to keep men insecure and chasing. Chasing is incompatible with sovereignty. Sovereignty requires disconnection from the comparison machine. Disconnection brings quiet. Quiet brings perspective. Perspective reveals how much life was wasted on performance. Performance is exhausting. Exhaustion is the enemy of peace. Peace is the prize. Men protect the prize by eliminating the sources of exhaustion. Elimination is selective but thorough. They eliminate toxic friendships that demand one sided support. They eliminate family obligations that feel like guilt trips disguised as duty. They eliminate romantic prospects that show red flags early. Early elimination saves years of pain. Years saved become years gained. Gained years are spent building instead of repairing. Building is satisfying in a way repair never was. Repair is reactive. Building is proactive. Proactive men feel agency. Agency is addictive. Addiction to agency keeps them moving forward instead of circling back. Circling back is what some observers hope will happen. They hope economic pressure will force men to re engage. They hope aging will make solitude unbearable. They hope cultural shame will regain its power. Hope is not strategy. Strategy requires understanding the opponent's incentives. Men's incentives point toward continued withdrawal. Withdrawal is working. Working strategies do not get abandoned because someone else hopes they will fail. Failure would require men to experience worse outcomes in solitude than in partnership. Solitude is delivering better outcomes on every metric that matters to them. Better sleep, better savings, better fitness, better mental health, better friendships, better hobbies, better sex when they choose it without strings. Better everything except the one thing society insists is the measure of a man's worth: a woman on his arm and children in his name. That metric was always external. External metrics lost their authority when internal ones proved more reliable. Reliable metrics win loyalty. Loyalty stays with what works. What works is self-directed life. Self-directed life scales. One man living it inspires two. Two inspire 10. 10 inspire a subculture. Subcultures become norms when they persist long enough. Persistence is built in because the lifestyle is sustainable. Sustainable lifestyles outlast trendy ones. The old lifestyle was not sustainable for men. It drained them faster than it filled them. The new one fills them steadily. Steady filling creates resilience. Resilience makes the lifestyle anti-fragile. Anti-fragile things grow stronger under stress. Stress is coming. Economic downturns, cultural pushback, demographic panic. The anti-fragile will absorb it and keep standing. Standing men do not need to chase. Chasing is for those who lack. Lack creates desperation. Desperation lowers standards. Lowered standards invite exploitation. Exploitation invites devastation. Devastation invites withdrawal. Withdrawal completes the loop. The loop is closed. Breaking it requires rewriting the rules so participation no longer equals devastation. Rewriting is not happening, so the loop spins on. Spinning loops create centrifugal forces. Force pushes people outward. Outward is where men are now. They are building outposts in the territory beyond the old walls. Outposts are small but defensible. Defensible outposts multiply. Multiplication creates territory. Territory held long enough becomes homeland. Homeland does not negotiate its existence, it simply is. That is the current state. Men have created a homeland of their own making. It is quiet, it is orderly, it is prosperous in non flashy ways, it is self governing. Self governing homelands do not seek readmission to empires that mistreated them. They trade when it benefits them, they ally when it serves them. They remain separate otherwise. Separation is not war, it is sovereignty. Sovereignty is the endgame. Men reached it through subtraction. Subtract obligation, subtract expectation, subtract performance, subtract guilt. What remains is essence. Essence is enough. Enough is peace. Peace is the ultimate wealth. Wealth buys nothing when it is internal. It simply exists. Existing without apology is the final freedom. The demographic contraction is no longer a forecast. It is the present tense in every developed economy that followed the same script. Classrooms that once overflowed with children now have teachers managing half empty rows, forcing consolidations and layoffs in districts that cannot sustain the overhead. Hospitals that built maternity wings in the 1990s are converting them to general use because births have fallen below the threshold needed to justify specialized staff. Pension systems designed around the assumption of endless population growth are staring at actuarial black holes where fewer workers support more retirees for longer. The math is unforgiving. When replacement fertility drops to 1.3 or lower for a generation, the pyramid inverts. The base narrows while the top widens. Widening tops means skyrocketing healthcare costs, shrinking labor pools, stagnant innovation, and political systems that fracture under the strain of promises made to yesterday's voters that tomorrow's taxpayers cannot keep. Politicians respond with the only tools they know: more money, more propaganda, more coercion dressed up as incentive. They float proposals to import workers en masse, ignoring that imported populations often adopt the same low fertility patterns within one generation once they absorb the cultural defaults. They push extended maternity leave, free preschool, housing vouchers for families, yet the data from every country that tried these levers shows marginal gains at best. The needle barely moves because the decision not to have children is not primarily economic for most people anymore. It is existential. Men especially see child rearing as the final, irreversible surrender of a sovereignty. Once a child exists, the state becomes a third party in the relationship with permanent claims on income, time, and decision making. Family courts already treat fathers as presumptive payers and mothers as presumptive custodians. Add a child to that equation, and the exit door shrinks to a keyhole. Men who have internalized that reality simply refuse to turn the key in the lock. Refusal at scale creates ghost economies in sectors built around family life. Toy manufacturers downsize lines. Baby formula companies pivot to adult nutrition. Diaper brands shrink market share year over year. Wedding planners rebrand as event coordinators for milestone birthdays because fewer couples reach the altar. Florists who used to sell out on Valentine's and anniversaries now rely on corporate accounts. Jewelers watch engagement ring sales plateau, while men buy themselves high end watches or custom firearms instead. The consumer patterns shift quietly but permanently. Money that used to flow into joint households now stays in individual accounts. Individual accounts mean higher savings rates, more investment in equities, more capital formation in non family directed assets. That capital does not disappear, it reallocates. It funds startups run by single founders, real estate purchases by men buying small, efficient properties, travel industries catering to solo adventurers, tech platforms built for personal optimization rather than couple coordination. Reallocation changes power. Power follows capital. When capital concentrates in the hands of people who have no dependents and no legal obligations to share it, the political conversation changes. Single men with growing net worth start voting differently. They prioritize low taxes, strong property rights, minimal regulation, and policies that protect individual sovereignty over collective welfare schemes. They fund candidates who promise to dismantle family court biases, enforce prenups, and reduce state intrusion into private contracts. The shift is slow but detectable. Campaign donations from high earning unmarried men under 40 are climbing in categories labeled men's rights or family law reform, even if the labels are softer in public filings. Lobby groups that once focused on women's issues now face counter lobbies that frame their demands as fairness for both sexes. Fairness sounds moderate, it gains traction when enough wallets back it because men have learned to protect them. Protection looks like diversification across jurisdictions. A man in his 30s might keep his primary residence in a low tax state, hold crypto in wallets outside easy seizure, maintain residency in a country with strong asset protection laws, and structure income through entities that shield it from future claims. These are not the moves of millionaires only. Middle class men are adopting light versions, separate bank accounts from day one in relationships, no joint titles on property until ironclad agreements are in place, documented proof of paternity before any name goes on a birth certificate. The precautions are becoming generational knowledge passed down like recipes or trade skills. Fathers who survived bad divorces teach sons how to avoid the same fate. Sons listen because they see the scars. Scars shape culture more than manifestos. The culture is shifting toward suspicion of institutional commitment. Marriage is no longer seen as a milestone of maturity. It is seen as a high risk contract with asymmetric downside. Cohabitation is viewed as a trial that can turn into common law entrapment without the safeguards of formal vows. Even casual dating carries disclaimers now. Men state boundaries early. No expectations of provision, no assumptions of exclusivity, unless explicitly negotiated, no path to children without mutual written intent. The disclaimers feel defensive until you remember the alternative was blind trust that ended in ruin for too many. Ruined men do not rebuild blind trust, they rebuild guarded trust. Guarded trust means fewer relationships overall, but higher quality when they occur. Higher quality is the silver lining men point to when asked about the trade off. When partnership happens now, it tends to be with women who have done their own homework, women who accept financial independence as non negotiable, women who view children as a joint project rather than a default outcome, women who understand court risk and agree to protections up front. These relationships are rarer but more durable because both parties enter with eyes open and exit ramps clearly marked. Rarity creates selection pressure. Selection pressure favors compatibility over convenience. Compatibility over convenience produces stability when it sticks. Stability is what both sexes claim to want. The path to it just got narrower and steeper. The narrower path frustrates those who remember wider roads. Older generations watch younger ones with a mix of confusion and concern. They remember when courtship was simpler, when divorce was rarer, when children were expected rather than optional. They attribute the change to selfishness, screen addiction, feminism run amok, or moral decay. Those explanations miss the mechanism. The mechanism is feedback. Negative feedback loops self correct. The old system gave men negative returns for participation. Participation dropped. Dropped participation gave negative returns to women who wanted families. The loop feeds itself. Feedback loops do not stop because people wish they would. They stop when the incentives flip positive again. Positive incentives require structural change. No fault divorce reform, presumption of joint custody, enforceable prenups, alimony caps tied to actual need rather than lifestyle maintenance, asset division rules that recognize separate contributions. Without those changes, the loop spins. Spinning loops produce casualties. Casualties are not abstract. They are women in their late 30s sitting in fertility clinics staring at declining egg counts and empty waiting rooms. They are men in their 40s who never had children and sometimes wonder if they missed something irreplaceable, but quickly remember why they chose not to risk it. They are parents watching adult children build lives without grandchildren to spoil. They are societies facing labor shortages, innovation slowdowns, and cultural stagnation because the creative energy of young families no longer renews the social fabric. The casualties accumulate quietly. Quiet accumulation turns into visible strain. Visible strain forces reckoning. Reckoning is where we are now. The reckoning looks like women publicly asking why men disappeared and men publicly answering with spreadsheets and court transcripts. It looks like viral threads dissecting family law horror stories. It looks like declining marriage licenses posted side by side with rising single home ownership rates among men. It looks like fertility doctors warning that the biological clock is not a myth and cultural narratives cannot rewrite physiology. It looks like governments admitting that financial incentives alone cannot reverse cultural withdrawal. The reckoning is uncomfortable because it requires admitting that both sides contributed to the imbalance. Women pushed for unilateral empowerment without recalibrating expectations. Men absorbed the push until absorption failed, then withdrew without negotiation. Neither side foresaw how completely the withdrawal would rewrite the rules. Rewritten rules mean new games. The new game favors those who thrive without interdependence. Men are thriving in that game because minimalism suits their wiring. They need less external validation to feel whole. They derive purpose from mastery and competence rather than relational status. They can sustain long periods of solitude without collapsing into despair. These traits become advantages in a low partnership world. Women who adapt fastest are those who mirror some of those traits. Radical self sufficiency, purpose derived from work or art or community, comfort with solitude. The adapters on both sides are building parallel lives that rarely intersect romantically but function well individually. Parallel lives reduce conflict reduces drama, reduced drama creates space for actual progress. Progress looks different now. Progress is a man at 45 retiring early because he never had dependents to support. Progress is a woman at 40 launching a business she always wanted because she never waited for a partner's approval or financial backing. Progress is lower crime in neighborhoods where single men invest in property and community instead of chasing relationships. Progress is higher charitable giving from people who have surplus resources they do not owe to ex spouses or children from broken marriages. Progress is mental health improvements among men who no longer carry chronic stress from unequal burdens. These gains are real, even if they are not the gains society planned for. Society did not plan for a world where men could opt out so thoroughly. Society assumed men would always pursue, provide, protect, regardless of cost. That assumption was the foundation of everything from tax policy to urban planning to cultural storytelling. The foundation cracked. The structure is still standing, but the cracks are widening. Widening cracks let in new air. New air carries new ideas. Ideas like a man's worth is not tied to his utility to women. Ideas like family is optional if the terms are predatory. Ideas like peace is a legitimate life goal. These ideas spread because they match lived experience. Lived experience trumps ideology every time. Ideology is catching up slowly. Some voices now frame male withdrawal as a rational response rather than pathology. They call for legal symmetry, cultural mutuality, honest conversations about risk. The conversations are uncomfortable, but necessary. Necessary conversations produce change when enough people participate. Participation is growing because denial is no longer tenable. Denial costs too much in loneliness, regret, and missed opportunity. Opportunity is what both sexes are redefining. Opportunity is no longer find a partner and build a family. Opportunity is build a life that sustains you whether a partner arrives or not. That redefinition is the deepest shift of all. Deep shifts take time to settle. They create turbulence while settling. Turbulence feels chaotic. Chaos breeds fear. Fear pushes some toward extremes. MGT Tao purism on one side, radical feminism on the other. Extremes are loud but marginal. The quiet majority is adapting pragmatically. Pragmatic adaptation looks like friendships across sexes without romantic pressure. It looks like co parenting arrangements negotiated like business contracts. It looks like intentional singlehood celebrated rather than pitied. It looks like communities built around shared values instead of shared households. These adaptations are messy but functional. Functional beats aspirational when survival is on the line. Survival is no longer guaranteed by following the old map. The map lied about the terrain. The terrain is harsher than advertised. Harsh terrain favors those who travel light. Men learn to travel light early. Women are learning now. Learning while moving is harder but possible. Possible means hope is not dead. Hope is just more expensive. It costs honesty. It costs lowered expectations. It costs willingness to meet reality without excuses. Reality right now says partnership is a luxury good, not a necessity. Luxury goods go to those who can afford them on fair terms. Fair terms are scarce. Scarcity increases value for those who achieve them. Those who achieve fair terms will build something new, something smaller, something voluntary, something revocable without catastrophe, something that rewards contribution rather than presence, something that survives because both parties want it more than they fear losing it. That something is not here yet at scale. It is emerging in pockets. Pockets grow into currents when conditions favor them. Conditions favor them when the old model fully exhausts itself. Exhaustion is nearing completion. Completion opens space. Space allows experimentation. Experimentation produces winners. Winners set the new standard. The new standard will not look like the old one. It will be leaner, more honest, more optional, more resilient to defection. Defection will always be an option because freedom includes the freedom to leave. Leave without ruin is the baseline now. Baseline sets the floor. Everything above the floor is choice. What choice is what men reclaimed. Choice is what women are reclaiming in their own way. Reclaimed choice creates agency. Agency creates possibility. Possibility is better than inevitability. Inevitability was the old promise. It failed. Failure teaches. Teaching produces evolution. Evolution is underway. It is not pretty. It is not sentimental. It is necessary. Necessary things endure. Endurance means the men who walked away are not anomalies, they are the vanguard. Vanguard shows the path. The path leads to lives that are smaller in scope but larger in control. Control feels like dignity. Dignity is non negotiable once tasted. Tasted dignity does not relinquish itself. Relinquishment is off the table. The table is set for whatever comes next. Next is not return. Next is continuation on new terms or no terms at all. No terms at all is working for millions. Working means it will continue. Continuation means the old world fades. Fading worlds leave echoes. Echoes remind us what was lost. Lost things teach value. Value is what we assign going forward. And going forward looks like men owning their time, their money, their peace. It looks like women owning their choices, their timelines, their futures. It looks like fewer illusions and more clarity. Clarity is cold, but it is clean. Clean slates allow new writing. New writing is what this era is doing. It is writing without permission, without apology, without guarantee. Writing that way is raw. Raw is honest. Honest is the only currency left that holds value. Value is what we have been circling. Value is no longer automatic, it is earned. Earned value lasts. Lasting value builds foundations. Foundations support whatever structure comes next. Next is unknown. Unknown is freedom. Freedom is the prize men took when they walked. They are not giving it back, they are living it. Living it quietly, living it fully, living it without asking if it is allowed. Allowed or not, it is happening. Happening means irreversible. Irreversible means this is the baseline now. Baseline means the conversation changes from why did they leave to what do we build from here. Building from here requires honesty about what broke and why. Why was imbalance? Imbalance was unsustainable. Unsustainable collapsed. Collapse cleared ground. Cleared ground grows new things. New things are growing. They are not romantic. They are practical. Practical endures. Endurance is the metric now. The men who walked away are enduring. They are thriving in ways that do not require applause. Thriving without applause is the ultimate proof of concept. Concept proven means replication. Replication means permanence. Permanence is the final note. Men are permanent in their withdrawal until the incentives reverse. Reversal requires symmetry. Symmetry is not here. So permanence holds. Holds long enough becomes the new default. Default shapes everything else. Everything else is adjusting. Adjustment is the story now. The story is long. It is unfinished. It is real. You made it through the full run. 1 hour gang. You are built different. You sat with the unfiltered view from start to finish. That takes spine. If these angry guy breakdowns are giving you something you cannot find anywhere else, and you want them to keep coming, drop a Red Bull my way. Link in the description. Everyone helps fuel the next. Hit the comments. Tell me what part of this entire arc stayed with you the longest. Which piece felt like it named something you have watched happen in real time, but never heard said out loud? Do you see any realistic off-ramp from this trajectory, or is this the equilibrium we are locked into for the next few decades? Speak freely. I read them all. Like the video if it earned your respect. Subscribe if you are not already locked in. Share it with anyone still operating under old assumptions. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.